October 31st, 1589, Bedburg, Germany. A farmer named Peter Stumpp is strapped to a breaking wheel in the town square. Over the next several hours, executioners will use red-hot pincers to tear the flesh from his bones in 10 places. They will break his arms and legs with a wooden wheel. They will behead him. Then they will burn his body. His 16-year-old daughter and his mistress will be strangled and burned alongside him. His crime? According to his confession, he had killed and eaten 14 children over 25 years while in the form of a werewolf. But here's what makes this story truly disturbing. Peter Stumpp almost certainly wasn't a werewolf. He probably wasn't even a serial killer. What happened in Bedburg in 1589 was something far more dangerous than one man's crimes. It was mass hysteria, a witch hunt that turned neighbors against each other, a community that, under enough pressure, convinced itself that monsters walked among them. And by the time it was over, the real question wasn't whether Peter Stumpp was a werewolf, it was how many innocent people died because everyone believed he was. To understand how an entire village could believe in werewolves, you need to understand that 1589 Germany was falling apart. The Protestant Reformation had shattered religious unity 30 years earlier. Catholic and Protestant territories were constantly at war. Villages changed religions with each new ruler. No one knew what to believe anymore. Economically, things were worse. A mini ice age had begun, causing crop failures across Europe. Famine was constant. The price of grain had tripled in a generation. People were starving. And disease was everywhere. Plague outbreaks swept through regularly. Syphilis was epidemic. Infant mortality was so high that parents often didn't name children until they survived their first year. In this world of constant death and uncertainty, people needed explanations. They needed someone to blame. The Catholic Church provided one. Witches and demons walked the earth, causing all this suffering. They were everywhere, hidden among normal people, your neighbor, your friend, even your family. And werewolves, people who could transform into wolves and devour children, were just one type of these demons. Bedburg, a small village near Cologne, was particularly hard hit. Children had been disappearing, livestock was being killed, and no one knew why. Until they caught Peter Stumpp. Peter Stumpp was a wealthy farmer, about 50 years old, respected in the community. He had a wife, 2 children, and owned substantial land. By all accounts, he was an ordinary man. Until the day in 1589, when hunters claimed they saw him transform. The story goes like this. Hunters were chasing a wolf that had been killing livestock. They cornered it in a field. But when they moved in for the kill, they didn't find a wolf. They found Peter Stumpp standing in human form. He was immediately arrested and taken to the town magistrate. And this is where the story gets dark, because what happened next was torture. Medieval German law allowed, even required, torture to extract confessions in cases of witchcraft and demonic activity. The rack, thumb screws, the strappado, where victims were suspended by their arms tied behind their backs. We don't know exactly what was done to Peter Stumpp, but we know he confessed, and his confession was extraordinarily detailed. He claimed that 25 years earlier, the devil had given him a magical belt. When he wore it, he transformed into the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like fire, a huge body and mighty paws. In this form, he said, he had killed and eaten 14 children, including his own son. He had also killed 2 pregnant women and ate their hearts panting hot and raw. He engaged in incest with his daughter. He had sex with a succubus sent by the devil. The confession reads like a checklist of every demonic crime the church warned about, which is the first clue that something is wrong. People under torture confess to what their torturers want to hear, and what the magistrates of Bedburg wanted to hear was that all their problems, the missing children, the dead livestock, the general sense that everything was falling apart, had a single identifiable cause: a werewolf, a servant of Satan, someone they could punish. The execution of Peter Stumpp on October 31, 1589, was designed to be a spectacle. Breaking wheel executions were reserved for the worst criminals. The process was deliberately slow and agonizing. First, Stumpp's flesh was torn from his body with red-hot pincers, 10 times, representing his 10 major crimes. Then his limbs were broken with a wooden wheel. They will behead him. Then they will burn his body. His 16-year-old daughter and his mistress will be strangled and burned alongside him. The magistrates erected a pole in the town square with a wooden wheel on top. On the wheel they placed an image of a wolf, and above it, Peter Stumpp's severed head. The message was clear: we have destroyed the monster. You are safe now. Except they weren't safe, because the real monster wasn't Peter Stumpp. It was the panic itself. Within months, more accusations followed. If one werewolf had lived among them undetected for 25 years, there could be others. Neighbors began watching each other with suspicion. Old grudges became evidence of demonic activity. Anyone who acted strangely, anyone who was different, became a suspect. His 16-year-old daughter Sybil and his mistress Catherine Trompin were both accused of being his accomplices in witchcraft. Both were strangled and burned, despite no evidence beyond their association with Stumpp. His crime became famous across Europe. Pamphlets describing Stumpp's crimes were printed in German, English, and French. The story spread, and with it, the panic. Other villages began finding their own werewolves. In the 1590s alone, dozens of people across Germany, France, and Switzerland were executed for lycanthropy, the werewolf condition. Each execution confirmed everyone's fears. The monsters were real, they were everywhere, and only through constant vigilance and brutal punishment could they be stopped. So, what actually happened in Bedburg? Modern historians have several theories, none of them involving actual werewolves. Theory 1. Peter Stumpp was a serial killer who used werewolf legends as a cover, or whose crimes were interpreted through the lens of werewolf mythology. Theory 2. The missing children died from disease, accident, or animal attacks, but in a community desperate for explanations, those deaths were attributed to a human monster. Theory 3, and this is the most disturbing, Peter Stumpp was entirely innocent. He was a wealthy Protestant farmer in a predominantly Catholic area during a time of intense religious conflict. His confession was entirely the product of torture, and his execution was a combination of religious persecution, community scapegoating, and a need to blame someone for tragedies that had no clear cause. We'll never know for certain. The historical record is incomplete, and it's been filtered through the biases of people who genuinely believed in werewolves. But here's what we do know. Not a single physical piece of evidence was ever presented. No magical belt was ever found. No witnesses saw him transform under circumstances that sound suspiciously like they were invented after his arrest. What we're left with is a confession extracted under torture, a community in crisis looking for answers, and a legal system that validated the panic rather than questioned it. If you think werewolf panics are just medieval madness, consider how the same pattern keeps repeating. The satanic panic of the 1980s and early 1990s, when thousands of people were accused of participating in satanic ritual abuse. Daycare workers were imprisoned based on children's coached testimonies about impossible crimes. Families were destroyed, lives were ruined. Almost none of it was real. The mechanisms are identical. Communities under stress, a mysterious threat to children, confessions extracted through pressure, and a legal system that validates rather than questions the panic. We don't believe in werewolves anymore, but we believe in other monsters. And when fear takes hold, the specific nature of the monster matters less than the need to find one.
So what do we learn from the Werewolf of Bedburg? First, torture produces whatever confession the torturer wants to hear. Peter Stumpp's detailed confession tells us nothing about his guilt, only about what his interrogators believed demons did. Second, communities in crisis need scapegoats. When life becomes unbearable and there's no clear enemy to fight, people will create one. The specifics don't matter. What matters is having someone to blame, someone to punish. Someone's destruction makes you feel safer, even if nothing has actually changed. And third, mass hysteria doesn't require stupidity or ignorance. The people of Bedburg weren't primitive or foolish. They were educated, religious, trying to make sense of genuine tragedies using the best explanatory framework they had, which happened to be wrong. On October 31st, 1589, Peter Stumpp was torn apart and burned in a town square in Germany. Was he a serial killer? Maybe.
Was he a werewolf? No. Was he innocent? Possibly. What's certain is that his execution didn't stop children from dying. It didn't end the famine. It didn't make Bedburg safe. It just gave them someone to burn. The werewolf trials continued across Europe for another century, each one following the same pattern: confession under torture, spectacular execution, and the spread of panic to new communities. If you want more stories from Europe's darkest chapters, where fear was more dangerous than any monster, subscribe to Occult Europe, because the past isn't dead. Sometimes it's still hunting.